We're starting the year of the rabbit off with a bang as Bunny at the Symphony makes his Las Vegas debut this weekend, and I'm here with its creator and conductor, George Daugherty, to talk about the legacy of Carl Stalling and his work that brought these vintage cartoons to life. So, of course, you realize this means podcast. Hello and welcome to, of course, you realize this means podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Graves, and with me today, it is an honor and privilege to have on conductor and creator and director, George Daugherty. And just talking about the legacy of music within Looney Tunes is such a near and dear topic to me, and I know him as well, and I just can't wait to dive in. So, George, how are you doing? And congratulations on 33 years of Bunny at the Symphony.
Yes, and we're actually nearing 34, which is crazy. Yeah, it's been quite an incredible, wild roller coaster ride. And when I thought up this project in 1989,
wow,
I thought I would do it for a couple of years and then return to my ultra serious ballet and opera conducting career in Europe that I had been doing and with symphony orchestras all over the place here in the US. But here we are in 2023, and we're about to launch another gigantic now international tour, as well as our performances this coming weekend in Las Vegas, which are all but sold out at this moment. So Adele is not the only one who is having a sold out residency in Las Vegas right now. BugsBunny is too.
And he joins good company with Elvis, having
Elvis, right,
in Las Vegas. And,
right,
that's a really cool thing to bring to Looney Tunes and continuing the legacy of traveling with these iconic pieces of music that people know because they watch the cartoons and they grew up with them. What's it like going from, city to city, but also internationally, and seeing the reactions from fans whenever you play these songs?
Well, right behind you right now, I can see the Hollywood Bowl. Leopold! And long-haired hair is currently part of our a part of our repertoire. This is a beautiful still that you have of it. It goes by really quick in the cartoon, so that's, it does. With your magnificent head in the way, I didn't quite recognize which cartoon it was from because the Hollywood Bowl appears so many times. But we've done the concert, 22 times at the Hollywood Bowl with the Los Angeles Philharmonic over the years, and of course, we've done it from every place virtually every medium and American symphony orchestra and Canadian symphony orchestra. We've played there multiple times, 8 sold out shows with the New York Philharmonic, Boston Pops, Philadelphia Orchestra, San Francisco Symphony, and then, all over the world, the Sydney Opera House over and over again. We're going back to Australia this spring. The Royal Festival Hall in London with the Royal Festival,
wow.
the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, the RPO, 10 sold out performances in the Kremlin Palace in Moscow,
Kremlin,
which has a capacity of about 5,000 people per concert. So that was like 50,000 people that saw it in Moscow, and we went to Moscow right when it was reopening, right after the wall came down. So it was crazy. So we calculate that we've played to over 250 orchestras, many of them many times over, and about 2.5 million people. And
that's incredible.
for those of your audience who might not know how this all works, of course, we're not just playing the music, because that was actually my first impetus was that, well, like everybody, I fell in love with this music when I was a little kid, sitting on the living room floor watching the cartoons on Saturday morning. And
same.
And right, but in my era, I'm probably at least 20 or 30 years older than you are.
Yeah.
But it was green shag carpeting in Indiana with russet orange appliances in the kitchen, and eating a lot of sugary cereal and gluten, which really got us ready for these cartoons. But I was absolutely mesmerized and blown away by the music when I was a little kid. Back in those days, in the early 60s, when you turned on the TV, it took like a minute and a half for the picture to warm up, but you could hear the audio immediately, and I could always find these cartoons by the music. And so I could tune the channel in just by hearing it. And so I was in love with this music. And so I then grew up to study music. I was studying piano, I was studying cello, I went to music school. Like everybody else, I sort of drifted away from them. And you also have to remember that in those days, there wasn't an internet, that we didn't have, digital devices. We didn't have HBO Max or YouTube or anything. And so
sure.
These cartoons sort of left my hemisphere for a couple of decades. And then when I was in my 20s, I was reintroduced to these cartoons. I was working on an animation score with some wonderful animators, and remembering also that this was like in the late 80s, when there wasn't even home video yet, barely. Yes. And so, the ability to see these cartoons was pretty rare. And unless you got up on Saturday morning, which I didn't, because I'd been conducting Swan Lake until midnight the night on Friday night. So I rediscovered this music, and I rediscovered the Carl Stalling music. And I was just absolutely mesmerized again. And I decided I had to conduct this music. I completely fell in love with Carl Stalling again, and then made the discovery, of course, that Milt Franklyn was an equal partner in many ways, because he really took over at a certain point when Carl retired. And so he did a lot of the things that I always just sort of attributed to Carl Stalling. So, because like Milt Franklyn did, What's Opera Doc, and not Carl Stalling.
Quiet, I'm hunting rabbits.
I decided that I had to conduct this music, but I very quickly realized that you had to see the cartoons while you hear the music. You can't just hear the music. Masterful and such a genius as Carl Stalling was, so much of his genius was the way the music works with the animation, as you well know already. And so it became clear to me, if I'm going to do this in concert, we have to show the cartoons. So that was a very long preamble to get to where I was going to tell your audience that when you come to see this concert, you see a big screen above the orchestra, and you actually see all the cartoons while the orchestra plays the music, the original Carl Stalling and Milt Franklyn scores live.
You're nice and clean, although your face looks like it might have gone through a machine.
Wonderful.
the voices and the sound effects are still on the original cartoon. So they're, we're racing to keep up with the whole thing for 2 hours and 15 minutes. And but that's the genius of this material, and it was the genius of Stalling's compositional skills. And also when you add into it Treg Brown, who did all the sound effects, then of course you add into it what every director brought to it, whether it was Chuck Jones or Friz Freleng or Bob Clampett or Robert McKimson or Tex Avery, the whole gang. It was a dream team that they had back then. Absolutely. And they made things of such brilliance that that's why we're still selling out concerts all over the world with this material.
That's a wonderful segue into us doing a deep dive a little bit into the history, but also the parts of it that we can dissect and the parts that excite you as a composer and a conductor yourself. So Milt, Franklyn, and Carl Starling, who you mentioned, alongside the resident WB orchestra that composed hundreds of film scores, brought to life what we know as Merrie Melodies and the Looney Tunes, giving operatic grandeur to the feel of those cartoons. Looney Tunes wouldn't feel the same without it. Where does the magic come from? Is it in the sheet music, or was it in the nature of the work that lent itself to pairing so well with that orchestral sound?
Well, the magic comes from, I think, more than a couple. It comes from a number of areas. Because, first of all, for the animated shorts, Warner Brothers was the only studio, pretty much. Disney did for a little while, but didn't last very long at all. Yeah. Warner Brothers was the only studio that used the full Warner Brothers Symphony for all of the Merrie Melodies and the Looney Tunes. So the orchestra that was recording these scores was the same orchestra that was recording Casablanca and the Maltese Falcon and Voyager and all the other, the gigantic, huge Warner Brothers epics that were being produced then. Mm-hmm. And so part of the magic was in this huge orchestra. So, when we have 80 musicians on stage, that's the way it was done back then. And it was done that way for over, I forget the exact number, but it's about 800. It's about 800 cartoons. And every one of them had an absolutely separate and totally distinct musical score. They didn't recycle anything. They didn't chop up their scores and create new scores. Every single score was composed and was created for that cartoon. So you can really trace sort of the entire history of musical performance in America by listening to, the cartoons from, around a little before 1930 to all the way to when they stopped doing them in, the early 60s.
Yeah. I love that uniqueness. I love that you can turn on a Looney Tune cartoon and it sound incredibly different than everything other, everything else in the catalog that you might run across. And I think it just adds to the complexity and the brilliance of those composers and those teams back then. You were mentioning Chuck Jones, and he had his own team, and you actually got to work with him a little bit before his passing.
A lot. I got to work with him a lot. I worked with Chuck for 10 years, or about before he passed away. He was really on the scene with us. I actually got to score 3 cartoons that he animated in the late 90s. That he came back to Warner Brothers and did a few new cartoons. So I did One Froggy Evening, Superior Duck, and I can't remember.
From Hair to Eternity?
No, it was Wile E. Coyote.
Chariots of Fur.
Chariots of Fur. Yes, and but he would come to our concerts and he would sit on stage with us and with the orchestra and me on, in performances, and he would always say, this is so fantastic because previous to this, I was the only one who ever got to hear it like this, because he would be the only one on the sound stage in the recording stage when the orchestra and Carl Stalling or Mel Franklyn were recording the scores. It was just the director who was there. So Chuck, and I suppose Tread Brown was there probably too, and some other people from the unit. But I mean, it was a very tiny audience. And I often, marvel and consider myself so lucky because Carl Stalling only got to conduct his cartoons one time. He only got to conduct What's Opera Doc Rabbit of Seville one time. Long-Haired Hair one time. Milt Franklyn only got to conduct What's Opera Doc one time. I've done them thousands of times by this time, and that I feel so lucky to be so intimately acquainted with the music.
That's amazing.
But the part of the genesis of this whole thing was that the Warner Brothers themselves had a vast and gigantic popular music catalog. And so they were trying to figure out a way to push their songs, their sheet music, because they also had a really big business in selling sheet music to consumers who had a piano in their house. And so when you hear, We're in the Money, or Hello My Baby, or all of those songs, those were all from the Warner Brothers catalog. And so these cartoons were originally sort of a MTV, very primitively.
Sure.
They really were sort of a commercial venture to push the songs. Then Carl Stalling started sneaking in more and more classical music. And there were, in the Tex Avery cartoons, you don't see so much of, there are little classical references, but there aren't these huge epic things.
Right.
But really with, Bob Clampett, with Friz Freleng, with, Corny Concerto, with Rhapsody Rabbit. Corny Concerto was Clampett. Rhapsody Rabbit was Freleng. And then Chuck got in on it with so many. The Rabbit of Seville being, absolutely iconic. What's Opera Doc being iconic. Long-Haired Hair, which you're sitting right in front of the background, being so iconic. Long-Haired Hair has everything from, it has Rossini, many quotes of the Barber of Seville, and the famous aria Largo al Factotum. It has Lucia di Lammermoor, the Sextet by Donizetti. It has Wagner, the Prelude to Act 3 of Lohengrin. It has a totally obscure piece of music that really hasn't hardly been heard anywhere, called the Overture to the Beautiful Galatea by Von Suppé. It's just filled with stuff.
I didn't know
that. So in the first 20 minutes of our concert, in addition to Carl Stalling, you hear Wagner, Tchaikovsky, Franz Liszt, Smetana, Von Suppé, Donizetti, Rossini, on and on and on and on. And the magic is where Carl Stalling, especially when he started, was able to morph from his own music into these great classical pieces, then come back out of them. But yet, when you listen to the Rabbit of Seville is a totally Rossini-esque size orchestra. He would keep to the original. Musical qualities of the music that he was parodying.
Parodying, yeah.
And so it's very accurate musically. Milt Franklyn did the same thing with What's Opera Doc. It's a Wagnerian size orchestra. And it's really funny. Chuck Jones was such an expert on music, and he was a huge fan of opera and such a huge fan of classical music, that he had written out on a piece of animation paper with an animation pencil the exact order of the music that he wanted in What's Opera Doc.
Wow.
And it starts with the Overture to the Flying Dutchman, and then it morphs very quickly into Kill the Wabbit, which is the Ride of the Valkyries from Die Walküre. We have the Venusberg Ballet from Tannhäuser. We have the Pilgrim's Chorus, the Overture to Rienzi, which is a totally obscure Wagner opera that most Wagner opera fans have never even heard. So it's just a masterpiece, and
it really is.
The score came down exactly like Chuck had written out in crayon. That's how organized they were. And the first thing that would happen was that they would all get together. So, let's say for Rabbit of Seville, Carl Stalling, Chuck Jones, Carl Stalling, Craig Brown, the sound effects guy, they would all get together and they would plot out the cartoon on a piece of musical staff paper. So the very first incarnation of any Looney Tune or any Merrie Melodies cartoon was actually was a musical sheet that had measures and counts.
Wow.
And everything was created rhythmically around what that was going to be. And that's why things work so brilliantly, is because from the very beginning, they were plotting out how sound effects and how music would work. The sound effects and the music in the Looney Tunes and Merrie Melodies are practically indistinguishable from each other. And the orchestra makes a lot of sound effects themselves. But a lot of the sound effects are right on the music. So when the coyote gets, cracked on the head by the Acme anvil, there's a huge musical hit, there's a huge sound effects hit, and they're all together. Their pre-planning and their pre-production, their coordination was where so much of the magic occurred.
That's incredible to know, and to just hear you wax poetically about how everything came together, and for the magic to come through on the sheet before they even start, pencil to paper drawing the characters. That is incredible. And I would love to see one of those pieces, in person. I would lose my mind.
Yeah, I'll show you. I'll show you what one looks like if I can find one.
Oh, wonderful.
Quickly. But that was their genius, was their ability to collaborate in the way they did. And that's what gives the Warner Brothers cartoons this absolutely distinctive sound that is just instantly recognizable.
Yeah.
It just didn't happen anywhere else.
I love that. And you're just adding to the legacy through, this show. And I love that you're bringing it to a new audience in Vegas. And I just wanted to, thank you for putting it out there and continuing on the legacy. And it's, important that these cartoons are shown in this way, because they were originally in theaters and we're not getting that, currently. And it's magical to watch them with an audience. And I love the fact that
you have to remember
that going.
You have to remember that there were 4 very distinct components to every soundtrack. So music, dialogue, there was a sound effect, dialogue, sound effects, and then audience. The audience is the 4th component of this of the soundscape.
Yes.
And it suddenly all makes sense when you hear it with an audience of 2,000 or 3,000 people, because we all have to remember that these cartoons were shown in movie theaters first before they were ever seen on television. So they were timed for a live audience. They were timed for audience reaction. They were timed for applause. They were timed for laughter. They were timed for all of that. And it just totally makes sense when you finally hear it with a live audience, because you can see that those little pauses that, were once there, that, they weren't irritating, but they were there, suddenly are filled up by what they were intended to be filled up with, which is audience reaction.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that's so amazing about, so when we first started this concert, you were talking about Dan Romanelli a little bit ago in our
Sure.
pre-pro.
Friend of the podcast, Dan Romanelli.
Right. Right. And I mean, Dan is our hero, because if it wasn't for Dan Romanelli, we would not have, we never would have started this project. He believed in this from the very beginning, but we only had like 3 cartoons done for the very first version of this concert, because back in 1989, it's before there were Macs. It was before there was programs like Finale or Sibelius or any of the great audio programs that exist now. We had to actually separate the music away from the dialogue and the sound effects. All that Warner Brothers had archived were the original single. It was called single stripe mag. It was a 32 millimeter or 35 millimeter single stripe mono compilation of music, sound effects, and voice. There were no separations at all. So we had to physically separate out the music away from the dialogue and the sound effects so we could actually play them in concert. Because you can't have the orchestra playing the scores if you still have the music on the original tracks. And that was very laborious back in 1989. It took us forever to do that. And also most of the scores had not been saved.
Oh, really?
And especially the great ones. What's Opera Doc had not been saved. Rabbit of Seville had not been saved. Long-Haired Hare had not been saved. The only ones that really had been saved that we do were Baton Bunny had been saved for some reason. High Note had been saved. And that was it. Everything else, everything else, we had about 16 people sitting with headphones transcribing note by note the original scoring.
Wow.
And
that is insane.
So when we first started, we only had 3 cartoons. We had Baton Bunny, Rabbit of Seville. We had 4. Baton Bunny, Rabbit of Seville, What's Opera Doc, and High Note. That's all. That's what we had. And we filled the rest of the concert in with sympathetic music, sympathetic concert music. So, we did a lot of Wagner. We did the Ride of the Valkyries. We did all that stuff. We did all the music that was in the cartoons, and then we would do the 4 cartoons. Technology got a lot better and quicker with every passing year. And now we have 28 cartoons prepared for live performance. Wow. So we laughingly and jokingly refer to ourselves as the only cartoon repertory company in the world. We can constantly switch up the cartoons and do slightly. We always do What's Opera Doc. We always do Rabbit of Seville. We always do Baton Bunny. Because the audiences would riot if we didn't. And people are singing along. People are shouting out the lines. I love that. I love the title of your podcast because I know exactly where it comes from. Exactly in the moment of Long-Haired Hare. Of course, this means war. And the audience always cheers at that moment.
So as fans, do we have to thank you for the whole restoration movement of Looney Tunes getting these restored versions on DVD and the retiming of everything and the music being added back? Did you start that whole thing for the Warner Bros. To see that there's actual value in doing that?
We were the first. I mean, I'm a contrary to what you might think, I'm a very modest person, and there were a lot of people who were behind the movement to give Carl Stalling and Milt Franklyn and the same year we did the very first performances of Bugs Bunny on Broadway. Our original show was called Bugs Bunny on Broadway. Originally it was going to be called Bugs Bunny in Concert.
Okay.
And then we ended up going to Broadway. And this is how crazy it was. We had done one. Warner Brothers wanted to see how it was all going to work. First of all, we were the first film and orchestra live concert in history. We were the first thing. And orchestras in 1989 thought we were nuts. Like, what? People are going to come and watch a symphony orchestra concert with a screen hanging above the orchestra, watch a movie or watch cartoons or what? Never going to happen. Never going to happen. But Dan Romanelli was so behind us, and we were so passionate about what we were doing. And so they decided we would do a test performance in San Diego. And so we did one performance in San Diego with the 4 cartoons and all the concert stuff. And a couple of things happened. Number one, there was a full-page ad on us in the Sunday San Diego newspaper. That was back in the days when there were still Sunday newspapers.
Yes.
And the show sold out in a matter of hours, like 3,000 tickets in a matter of hours. So this was the first hint that we have something here. Secondly, when we saw the audience on the one test performance, it was almost 100% adults.
Wow.
Barely a kid. I mean, our concert is very multi-generational. It's great for kids. It's great for families. It's great for we get grandparents, their kids, and their kids. But this is not a kids show, and as you well know, the Looney Tunes are not for kids specifically. They were for everybody. And
McKimson has been quoted many times saying they are for adults usually, but they work for everybody.
And Chuck Jones also. Chuck was the one that would say, "I didn't make these for kids." It's like but, the very funny thing was that from 33 and a half years of doing this, the pattern of laughter is the same everywhere in the world. Whether we're in China, where we have been and where we're going back to 10 cities, or other countries where English is not the first language, the laughter always appears. I hear 3 distinct kinds of laughter. I hear the laughter coming from kids. I hear the laughter coming from adults at the double entendres, the stuff that the kids don't get. Then I hear the laughter just coming from everybody. And it's the same everywhere in the world. It's so consistent. That's part of the genius also. I consider myself so lucky, but I consider that it's great for the audiences. But yeah, we were the first ones to restore the music for these cartoons. We are the only ones that, because it's never turned up. I always thought that over 30 years that the original conductor score for What's Opera Doc or the Rabbit of Seville or some of those would turn up, and they never have. They're in somebody's garage somewhere. I over the years I've heard so many stories that, especially regarding like animation cells, I would hear. I've heard this story over and over again. Oh, we used to live next door to Friz Freleng, and he would bring us stacks of original animation cells, and then when we moved, my mom threw them all away.
Oh wow!
But what makes me proud of what we have done, circling back around to what you asked a moment ago, is that we have restored the actual printed music for these, so people can see them and study them. And we were lucky to have the ones that we have. And it's very funny because there is a list of probably maybe 200 scores that were saved, but they were mostly not as significant cartoons out of the 800. So someone really walked away with the good stuff. And it's somewhere in the world, but it hasn't showed up in 33 years. But by looking at what he did for other cartoons, even if they weren't perfect for our concert, we were able to figure out how he did things. The whole invention of the click track system.
What's that? If you could explain to the listeners.
The simplest way to explain the click track is that when movies got sound, so if anyone's ever seen Singing in the Rain, you know how that happened. There had to be a way to coordinate music and the film itself, so the music would all end up in the right place. it's especially urgent in Looney Tunes and Merrie Melodies because the synchronization is so incredibly tight. So it was Carl Stalling who came up with this idea of a click track. So it's it's like a metronome beat that you hear in headphones like you're wearing. There's only one side to the headphone so that you can hear the click track with one ear and you hear the orchestra and the players hear themselves out of the other ear. The click track is made first. That was the second thing that happened after the bar sheets were made, is that a click track would be made by Carl Stalling and everything would be plotted out. So that's how the music stays in synchronization with the picture.
Wow.
And
that's cool.
This is a technique that is still used to this day for every piece of film music that you hear anywhere. And it was Carl Stalling who invented this. He changed the film world because they were having tremendous problems syncing everything up. And they would try to do streamers and punches right on the film. They would take grease pencil and make squiggles on the film so the conductor would sort of know where he was at, things like that. But the click track ended up being the answer to everything. So we do the whole concert with the click track, and we have a lot of Carl Stalling's original click tracks. And so the way it all, because we have to keep up with these cartoons for 2 hours and 15 minutes with a live orchestra on stage.
Sure.
And people like you and other fans and other experts who know these cartoons so well would know in a second if we weren't together with the sound effects and the dialogue. And of course, the dialogue, I haven't said anything about either Mel Blanc or Arthur Q. Bryant, but and so many people don't know that Mel Blanc never did Elmer Fudd except for a very, very few times at the very end of his career. But Elmer Fudd was done by a incredible old character actor named Arthur Q. Bryant. And Arthur Q. Bryant had like the worst agent in Hollywood. So Arthur Q. Bryant never got a screen credit once ever. And Mel Blanc got a screen credit on cartoons where he didn't even speak. But Mel Blanc was a genius. I mean, they call him the man of 1,000 voices, but he was really the man of 999 because it was Arthur Q. Bryant that did Elmer Fudd. So when they're singing the love duet in What's Opera Doc, Rejoin My Love, it's right after Bugs comes down on this horse, which is right behind me. They were actually, it was two pot-bellied 58-year-old men singing Wagner to each other in a recording studio. They were actually singing together. And that's another thing that makes it so magic is the voices. And, the female voices were mostly done by B. Benaderet and the great June Foray. June Foray was a really good friend of ours and appeared on stage with us many times. And of course, away from Warner Brothers, she also did Rocky and Natasha. And she was just an icon also. Today, it basically takes 16 people to do what Mel Blanc basically did by himself.
Absolutely.
And one of the other things that I really love about the whole thing is that Jack Warner had, one of these cartoons done for a kind of low budget. I mean, they didn't have, there's a hysterically famous story about Chuck Jones who wanted more production money and more stuff for What's Opera Doc. So for like an entire year before, he did a little bit less on every other cartoon. So he would have a sort of a war chest built up that he could use on What's Opera Doc. And,
wow.
And so What's Opera Doc has more backgrounds, has more, really animation than, anything else that he ever did. They had to work with really small budgets. And, they were, in the place called Termite Terrace, which was named aptly. yet it had termites in it. And so Jack Warner and Leon Schlesinger, who was the producer, were very money conscious. And one of my favorite things about all this is that the recording sessions were never scheduled.
I was actually going to ask you about this rumor.
Yeah,
so it's real.
It's totally real. The recording sessions were never scheduled. They would suddenly have 15 minutes at the end of a Casablanca session or another session, and the phone would ring, and Carl Stalling and Milt Franklyn and everyone. Yes. Well, I have
love it.
They would come running across the lot with music flying, and they'd throw it down, and the musicians would record these scores very, very quickly. And I think that is what gives the original recordings this sort of very effective sound of sort of abject terror, because the musicians were literally like hanging on to their seats to play all this stuff.
It speeds by too. Like it has a rhythm, but it's also, like, let's get these sounds in and get out.
Well, they didn't have much time. And they would just record one part at a time, rehearse, record, and then move on to part 2, rehearse, record, move on to part 3, etc. Our orchestras for the concert don't have that luxury. They have to play everything from beginning to end in one fell swoop, and they do 17 or 18 of them in one night. So
it's a lot.
It's a real workout. We always say that there's no slow movements in Looney Tunes, which there aren't. So but that was another thing that was just there was a real edginess to the original recordings that I think came from just having to like hold on to your seats and play it quickly. And you have to remember that there were more symphony orchestras in Hollywood in the 1930s and 40s than in any other city in the world, because every single studio had their own full-time orchestra and of 70, 80 musicians. And they did not overlap. So the MGM Orchestra was the MGM Orchestra, Paramount Orchestra, Universal Orchestra, 20th Century Fox Orchestra, which was legendary. The concertmaster of the 20th Century Fox Orchestra was Leonard, the great conductor Leonard Slatkin, who is one of the greatest conductors today. It was his father, Felix Slatkin, and his mother was the principal cellist at Warner Brothers. She was the first female principal musician in any Hollywood orchestra. The level of musicians in Hollywood at this time were stupendous, because so many of them had come from Europe to escape World War II. And so the playing was just unbelievable back then. And, you just hear things that you just don't hear, attention to detail that you don't. So all the detail was lavished on the live action films. But the cartoons had to be done very quickly, but still there was an overflow from what they already knew and what they did for all these other films that, they used in the cartoons. So they were really raring to go always. So
according to Mel, he said that it took them about 8 months to, a full year to get one of these cartoons completely done, from, the story process to the animation and getting it out in theaters. And Carl Stalling conducted the orchestra and put the music to the visuals in a week. So like that's just an insane workflow that I just can't wrap my head around. But it's phenomenal. I love it.
Well, you also have to remember that, as you were saying earlier on, every director had his own animation unit.
Yeah.
So at one time, there was a time where there were 5 directors there all at the same time. So there was a time when Chuck, Frizz, Robert McKimson, Bob Clampett, Tex Avery, when they were all there at the same time. So there would be 5 different cartoons in process. And even though it took a year for one cartoon, even Chuck would be working on maybe 4 cartoons a year. So they were everything was staggered.
Okay.
So when they were finishing up one, they'd already started another, and there were a couple others in the middle. So, but they had their own animation units, their own animators, their own ink and painters, you know, but Carl Stalling was doing the music for everything.
Yeah.
So, you know, he was legendary in his ability to compose quickly. And so was Milt Franklyn. You know, Milt Franklyn is nothing, you know, I've come to really, you know, Carl gets so much of the credit, and justifiably so. I mean, he invented the whole genre of animation music. But Milt Franklyn, for a lot of Carl Stalling cartoons, was the orchestrator. And so they were working together on a lot of stuff. And and actually on the great cartoon Zoom and Board, which we do in our concert, which is, you know, one of the great Roadrunner cartoons of all time. I mean, from the musical aspect, it's my favorite Roadrunner cartoon. That and There They Go, Go, Go. They're both sort of equal in their brilliance of musicality. But they both got credit together on Zoom and Board. So that's music by Carl Stalling and Milt Franklyn. But, you know, Milt, they both had really amazing backgrounds. Carl Stalling grew up in Lexington, Missouri, which was all the way in the very north part of the state of Missouri. And by the time he was like 12 years old, he was playing the piano in the local silent movie theater.
He was a prodigy.
Yeah, before movies had sound. You know, he was composing on site. He was improvising, composing as a 12-year-old. And then when he went to Kansas City and St. Louis, and it's amazing because we go and play with the St. Louis Symphony quite frequently, and we're playing the Powell Hall, which is the home of this. It's the concert hall of the St. Louis Symphony now. Was the St. Louis movie theater, the St. Louis Theater, where Carl Stalling was the resident organist. So it's like being in Bayreuth, which is Wagner's home theater in, you know, Germany. You know, this is where Carl Stalling did his thing, and then at the in Kansas City also. And of course, in Kansas City is where Carl Stalling met Walt Disney.
Yeah, it's holy ground for animation fans.
Right. And so, and you know, Ubi Iwerks.
Iwerks, yeah.
Iwerks, I don't remember how to pronounce his name. I mean, that was like, you're right, hallowed ground, and they all ended up in Hollywood. And then Carl very quickly ended up at going from Disney to Warner Brothers. And and he stayed there, which was, you know, fantastic for all of us. But he was a trained musician.
Yeah.
Milt Franklyn was a virtuoso woodwind player, and he could play all of the woodwind instruments brilliantly. So flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, bass clarinet, everything. Wow. And that is why the woodwind writing for these cartoons is so absolutely brilliant. When you come to this concert on Saturday, just Zoom and Board. Just be aware during Zoom and Board that of what the Woodwinds are doing.
Okay, I'll definitely make notes.
The extended bassoon solos, where nothing is playing but this bassoon. When Wile E. Coyote is going up that long stairway to the top of that peak, the bassoon is just doing da dee 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 dee, and then the next thing you hear, just the bass clarinet. Ba-dum. I mean, the woodwind writing is brilliant for the entire section. It's harder than you can imagine. I mean, musicians from the New York Philharmonic are saying, "My God, this is harder than The Rite of Spring," you know. But they love it. They love it because it was written by, you know, and arranged by a real woodwind player who knew how to write for the instruments.
On a more personal note, what brings you the most joy while performing? Is it the audience interaction with the animation, or the music accompanying it, or both?
Well, there's 3 things.
Oh, 3 things.
Yeah, you mentioned the first 2. The audience interaction is incredible. The playing and conducting the music is incredible. And I never get tired of it because it is so brilliant. It's like Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker, because I'm also a ballet conductor. It's like I've conducted Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker 1,000 times in my career over 40 years, and I never get tired of it because it's so brilliant. This is exactly the same thing. I never get tired of this music because it is so incredibly brilliant. The third thing, though, is watching and performing with these hard-ass classical musicians who are having the best time of their lives playing this music. And I'm talking about, the New York Philharmonic, the Philadelphia Orchestra, the Boston Pop, and they're just loving it. And the reason they love it is kind of threefold. They love it because it's brilliantly done. They love it because of what is happening in that instant, with the audience and with everything else. I mean, our audiences are crazy, and it's like the Beatles are on, when Bugs makes his entrance. Sure. But the third thing is that they're recapturing their own childhoods. And you can't believe, as I look out into the orchestra, how many times I see musicians mouthing, "Oh, Brunhilde, you're so lovely. Yes, I know it. I can't help it." I mean, they know the words. The musicians know the words. That all brings me the joy. That's and wonderful. I created this concert in partnership with my husband, David Wong, who is the co-creator with me, the technical director. He basically does everything else but conduct. I mean, he's the reason that we have incredible lighting, that the screen is gorgeous, that everything works. I mean, this is no small feat, because basically we're bringing an entire movie studio, recording studio onto a stage, which is not used to having all this stuff there. Every musician has a little black box and their headphones and microphones and all of this stuff. It's really it's exactly like a live recording. It's exactly like what Carl Stalling was doing on the scoring stage. It's exactly the same. We use all the same techniques. We use all the same kind of equipment. It's advanced technically, but the mechanics are all exactly the same.
Sure. Yeah, you're bringing the old into the new.
It's a little scary. I mean, there's a lot that could go wrong, and hardly ever has anything gone wrong in 33 years because David is so brilliant at his job, and we have really great sound and video people and stage hands, but there is a lot that could go wrong when you look at all this stuff up on an orchestra concert platform that's not used to having it. But luckily it doesn't.
Luckily it doesn't, and I hope that it continues that trend and that success for both of you. Thank you both for putting this on. I do have 2 more questions to get through while I have you. One is Baton Bunny, Rhapsody Rabbit, and A Corny Concerto and Long-Haired Hair all have the tunes playing instruments or conducting an orchestra themselves. Which do you find the most authentic and the most hysterical within those segments?
Well, without fail. Now, okay, I'll give you one comparison first.
Okay.
Of another conductor type cartoon. Tom and Jerry at the Hollywood Bowl.
Okay.
Tom is a terrible conductor. You look up at him and you have no idea what he's doing. We've had that cartoon, even though it's not a Looney Tune, we've had that cartoon in our show because it's a brilliant cartoon. Sure. It's a brilliant cartoon, but I cannot look at the screen and conduct at the same time, or I will get totally screwed up because he's just doing that. Bugs in Baton Bunny, easily the orchestra could just look at the screen and I wouldn't even have to be there.
Wow.
All of Bugs's conducting patterns, 3, 4, 1, everything. It's perfect. Chuck learned conductor's patterns and conductor's rhythm, conductor's technique, and Bugs. We're doing the same exact thing. So without fail, Bugs's conducting in Baton Bunny could lead any orchestra in the world. It is perfect.
I love that.
In Long-Haired Hair, of course, we get ha, ha, ha. So, that's not quite, perfect technique, but it is perfect for the cartoon.
The
but
octave range is
yes,
just adding to it.
That all the way down. But it's become a real thing when we go to the Philadelphia Orchestra. And we've done this a lot with the Philadelphia Orchestra, and we actually toured with them last summer to the Vail Music Festival at Vail, Colorado, because Bugs is playing Leopold Stokowski, who was the iconic music director of the Philadelphia Orchestra for, many, many decades. So when the whole orchestra is going, Leopold, 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 when Bugs comes out in the white wig,
yes,
the whole orchestra and the whole audience of Philadelphia, they're all screaming, Leopold, 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 Leopold. So that has a certain kind of realism to it. Now, Corny Concerto is a real favorite of mine.
Greetings, music lovers.
Because it is just so incredibly beautiful. As you, I'm sure, know, it was sort of a parody and a takeoff of Fantasia.
Yes.
So all of the backgrounds are this, florid, gorgeous, the trees are moving with the music and the gorgeous floral backgrounds and the way that Carl Stalling treated Johann Strauss's music is just amazing. It is so authentic. It is so real. It is just a total delight to do it. And as the clock is dinging behind me, and it's just perfect. And then, of course, it has Elmer coming up in between sections saying, listen to the whippling rhythm of the woodwinds and all that kind of stuff. And of course, that's also a takeoff of Stokowski again, who did the same thing in Fantasia. And so I just love Corny Concerto. It is, for me, it is a break from all the chaos of all the rest. So many of the cartoons it's brilliant chaos. It's brilliant.
They are,
but it is chaos. Yeah, especially from the conductor side. And the three new Looney Tunes by Christopher Leonard's, Fur Flying, Coyote Falls, and Rabbit Rider. Now I remember all three of them. They're like the fastest things. They're as fast as the Quidditch game in Harry Potter. they're it's just hold your hats. So Corny Concerto just gives me the moment to just breathe, and it is just so gorgeous. Rhapsody Rabbit is very fun. We're not doing Rhapsody Rabbit at the moment because it's currently rotated out because we keep rotating everything. Rhapsody Rabbit is brilliant because of a couple of reasons. Number one, normally the music was recorded by Carl Stalling after the cartoon was animated. So it was post-scoring, what we call post-scoring, after the physical production. And that's how most movies are done. With Rhapsody Rabbit, the track was laid down first. And so the pianist was in the studio with the orchestra and Carl Stalling conducting, and they just did it wild with no click track. So we do it in concert. We don't have a click track for that, but we just have to, I'm literally following Bugs as the pianist the way I would follow a real pianist in a concerto in a concert.
That's impressive.
And the pianist was really, really brilliant who played it. And so but here's the funny thing about their attention to detail, which is so amazing. The original Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody is in C sharp minor. And so a lot of black keys. So they recorded it. Then they noticed that the animation, for ease of animation, had been done in C minor. So once quarter step down, half step down. So there would be less black keys, because it was really hard to get the black keys animated as opposed to the bigger white keys. Carl Stalling and the pianist were really flummoxed that the music and the picture didn't match in terms of tonality. So they went back in and re-recorded it one half step lower. So it also would be in C minor instead of C sharp minor. So that's how seriously they took their work. There's a little in high note where the little notes are going ba 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 bum blum 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 blah 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 blah. There's a wrong note in there, and Chuck would cringe every time. He said, "I always wanted to go back in and reanimate that so there wouldn't be a wrong note on the animation." So they really took their work incredibly seriously.
That actually answered my last question, which was, getting more nerdy with it. Were there any musical Easter eggs within the way a character plays or conducts, or did Carl Starling ever sneak anything in that was like a musical like joke or something like that?
All the time, and stuff that you can't even, and sometimes you don't even notice them until you actually look at the cue sheets, because they still like that from back then, and there'll be like 2 seconds of something. But it's like the end of the Rabbit of Seville, which is all Rossini, and then suddenly, when Elmer and Bugs are standing in front of the wedding cake, they throw in Mendelssohn for just 2.5 seconds. They were always just playing practical jokes on each other, but it was always done with such brilliance. The animators would also stick in a frame of something here and there that later had to be cut out once video was invented and people had slow motion or pause. I won't go any further into that, but Chuck Jones and Friz Freleng had to fess up that there were a few single frames that would need to be taken out before this was put out on video.
Those pranksters.
So there was never a dull moment there, but Absolutely. They were also incredibly competitive with each other. They all wanted to be the funniest. They all wanted to be the best. They were friends, but not that good of friends. I was around Chuck and Friz together a lot, even when they were almost 90. And there was still, even at that point, this incredible competition with them.
Wow.
That was just palpable.
Yeah.
You could feel the electricity between the two of them.
It added to the work. It added to, the experience of
watching. It added to the brilliance, because every cartoon they tried to top the one that came before it.
I love that.
That's what made it so brilliant. And, they all stayed with animation. These weren't like people who did animation and then went on to like make bigger films. This was their world, and they loved it so much. And that's what translates to the audience. I mean, one of my favorite moments in concert, you ask about, the audience, is that here we are at the New York Philharmonic. Every single performance is sold out. 8 performances were sold out, and they couldn't even, thousands of people couldn't buy tickets because there weren't enough seats. They couldn't extend it anymore. And on the opening night in New York, in front of critics, in front of everybody, and then I turn around and I talk to the audience a few times during the concert and tell some of these stories and things. And I was suddenly aware, I'm on the edge of the stage at Avery Fisher Hall, now it's called David Geffen Hall, right on the edge of the stage. And I was aware that somebody was moving back and forth right in front of me in the first row, literally 4 feet, 3 feet away from me. And I had the spotlight in my eyes, so I really couldn't see, but she was like actually getting into my spotlight. And I looked down, and there was a mom who had brought her 5 kids, remembering that in New York, the front row was going for about $135 a seat. She had brought her 5 kids in footy pajamas And while I was talking, she was passing out cereal bowls. Then out came the Tupperware thing of cereal. And then she came back down the row again, got the Tupperware of milk, and then handed them all a spoon. And she wanted them to have the experience of eating the cereal and watching the cartoons. And so I put it into parenting. I included her in my bit. And, that is exactly what it's all about. For me is recreating these moments. And, we live in a turbulent world, and my God, after the last 2 to 3 years, it's, a mess. And, we were out for 2.5 years. We missed Bugs' 80th birthday and everything.
I know. I was so sad.
Yeah, me too. I was really sad, but this year we have Warner Brothers 100th anniversary. Yes. So that's really good. But so this concert just lifts a lot of the world's woes off of everyone's shoulders for 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 15 minutes. And that's what makes me so happy about it.
Well, speaking on behalf of all the fans out there, we are internally excited about seeing it back up there and grateful for you and David to bring it back. And, I can't wait to see it. And I know people can buy tickets over at the Smith Center currently. And if there are tour dates or anything that comes up, I'll gladly share them on the Instagram.
We have an amazing year coming up. First of all, if you want to get tickets for this week, just Google Bugs Bunny at the Symphony, Las Vegas Philharmonic. Okay. And that will take your audience right to the but also we have a great website, BugsBunnyAtTheSymphony.com or BugsBunnyAtTheSymphony.net, and that has our tour schedule on it. It's about to be updated in 1 week. All of our new performances are going to be listed. They're not quite there yet, but in the next year we're going to Australia, we're going to Mexico, we're coming back to LA, we're going to perform at the Rome Film Festival in Rome. This summer we're going to perform with the L'Orchestra de la Suisse Romande, which is probably the finest orchestra in all of Europe, at their gorgeous concert hall in Geneva, Switzerland. So, when this all really comes together is that when we combine these great cartoons with these world-class venues, and that's when it really, really works. Because it's, as someone has said, it's the best of highbrow, meaning lowbrow, but it's hard to tell which is the lowbrow and which is actually the highbrow. But we're grateful to you because you really keep it alive too, and that's what we all have to do. And now kids don't see it on TV anymore. So the cool thing is that so many of the kids that come with their parents and their grandparents and everybody else have never seen these cartoons before. When we first started 33 years ago, it was still on Saturday morning. It was still on every afternoon. Now it's not. So we're introducing, these whole new generations to these cartoons for the very first time. And these kids just love it. And their parents love it. Their grandparents love it. I'm sure we have some of their great grandparents there. And
the cross-generational, entertainment.
It's totally multi-generational. And that's what Chuck wanted. That's what Frizz wanted, Bob Clampett, Robert McKimson, Tex Avery. That's what they all wanted. They were making these for everybody. And that's what we do.
I love that. Arthur Davis as well. And,
yes, absolutely.
Everybody. So thank you again for your time and talking with us and, getting deep and nerdy into the music aspect of these cartoons, which I love so much. And as always, that's not all, folks. And find your tickets now because I'm sure it's going to sell out before you can say, "What's up, Doc?"